Hi,
Hi
everyone.
everyone, welcome back to Dad's Explaining Politics. We're back for another episode. We're still going strong, so don't forget about us. Make sure to tune in every week for our Thursday weekly episode. And we're excited to hear any updates on what's going on in the world and any suggestions that you want us to talk about going into the future. So we've gotten a few suggestions over our time doing this podcast, but we'd love more. So we'll get into some stuff now. So what are we going to start with, Dada? Do you want to go into that?
Yes, we're going to cover, first of all, the ceasefire between Pakistan and India. We're going to then
Mm-hmm.
look at Russian peace talks, which are going to be scheduled in Turkey. The tariff the latest from Saudi Arabia. And then we'll finish off with Australian political things, the new Labor ministry, and the new Liberal leadership.
Exciting. Very fun. Um, I mean, a lot of it is not that fun, but interesting for us, I guess, and hopefully for our listeners. So recent updates on the whole India-Pakistan situation is that Donald Trump tweeted on May the 10th that India and Pakistan had agreed to a ceasefire. So I think everyone, breathed a big sigh of relief, thinking, oh God, this another focal point of tension in the world. Maybe it's not going to become another crisis situation that we have to deal with on top of, Ukraine and Gaza and a bunch of other unnamed places. But I don't think that either side is too happy with this deal, and I don't think that India and even Pakistan are happy with the US intervening in the situation. So I don't know what you have to say about that.
I think the Indian side actually sort of said they had brokered the deal and not Trump, as if Trump was
Mm,
trying to gain credit for the deal. But look, the good thing is that there's a ceasefire, right? Two nuclear armed powers that haven't been in conflict for 30 to 40 years or something. So the world doesn't need another flashpoint. So I think sound minds have prevailed when they're both nuclear powers, and hopefully things will settle down. The more time goes on, the less likely another skirmish is.
yeah, but the unfortunate thing is Kashmir is one of those regions that, since it's undisputed, remains a difficulty going into the future, right? Like I remember before everything happened with Gaza, Jerusalem was one of those regions. It was one of those things that neither side will ever feel happy until they gain control over that piece of territory because they both believe that they deserve it and it's special in some way, and they're never going to relent until they get it. So
That's
I think
true,
that
but yeah, but there's
the
been
dispute
there's been
over
a peace.
this territory,
There's not
though, has been a dispute since 1947, since
Yes, exactly.
the subcontinent was partitioned, and that means it's like integral to their national identity, the fact that they believe that it's disputed and that it should be part of their country, etc., etc. I think it's only so long something like that can exist before either power starts to encroach on the other power's
But I would take
position.
the alternate view, Freddie, that it's been peaceful for so long, even though it's disputed. Why can't it continue to be peaceful, right?
I think it can't continue to be peaceful because I think the world is watching what's happening in Ukraine right now and seeing how everyone responds to it. China, particularly, obviously, is watching what they're doing in order to, gauge how they should proceed with Taiwan and reunifying China, Greater China policy. I think they're waiting to see what happens. They're waiting to see how the world reacts to everything else. And I think that potentially India and Pakistan could be waiting to see how the world reacts to those issues. And then maybe it's not going to be so peaceful anymore.
Theoretically correct, but I don't have the feeling that India wants to take this on,
I mean,
right?
I'm
I mean,
glad that's your feeling.
there's a
Have you had a
great deal
chat
of
with Narendra Modi
like,
recently?
yes, I did. I had a call with
Oh,
him
really?
yesterday.
Sounds good.
So
Sounds good.
I just don't think that's too much of a concern. But anyway, look, you never know. It could always happen. So shall we move on to the Russian peace talks or the potential talks?
Yeah, we can move on to that, but I just want to say before we move on that I think that this is still an incredibly important area to be focusing on, and we should all be turning
Oh,
our eyes to that and making sure that um, our governments are proceeding in the right way because yeah, we have a duty, and I think the world is about to it's tipping, right? Like it's on a focus on a little thing in this tipping, and all these crises are making it about to like tip just into complete and utter like anarchy. We don't want that to happen. So
That's
let's
true.
stop that from happening.
That's true.
I don't think it's so far away. But yep, let's talk about the Ukrainian peace talks. That's a good segue.
So, going to be held in Turkey, but who knows whether Putin is really genuine or not. The Europeans, just to bring you up to speed, said that, you better agree a 30-day ceasefire by Tuesday this week. It's now Wednesday. Putin said he'd be willing to, or the Russians said they'd be willing to meet directly with the Ukrainians later in the week. So I think that's where we're at, right? We don't know whether that meeting later in the week's going to happen and who's going to be attending from each side.
I mean, as far as I know, the meeting was meant to be today. So
Okay.
that's going to
That's
be
what I
happening
thought Thursday.
later today, and I think that the updates on it so far is that in the past Putin said that he would go. Now it looks like he's not going to be there. Zelensky was going to go if Putin was going. Trump then said he would be going if Putin was going. Putin does not seem like he's going. He's just sending a Russian delegation. So we're going to see what happens there, whether Zelensky still makes the trip or not. I expect that he will. It's meant to be held in Istanbul, yeah.
Hmm.
So, there's been various delegations in Turkey for the past few weeks. I know Marco Rubio is in Antalya at the moment, which is a lovely
Hmm.
area in Turkey that I went to last year. But he's there right now, so already having talks with Erdogan, I believe, and trying to figure out the situation. Because, I mean, in case you guys don't know, Turkey could be considered one of Russia's closest allies, just
Hmm.
simply in the way they don't stop each other from doing anything. I think they have a sort of mutual respect for each other.
Mm. That's
Yeah,
why I
and there's a lot
think
of Russian people who live in Turkey.
Turkey can play a really important role in this because Russia
Mm,
respects them and they're in the area, the Black Sea area. So they can play an important role. And Trump was even talking about Turkey meeting Erdogan and all that, was speaking very positively about Turkey's role.
mm. Yeah, well, that's a good thing. Yes, Trump. Um, Speaking of him, so we're going to see how that goes. Obviously, we don't have more updates on that because the meeting actually hasn't happened yet, which is unfortunate. I wish that we'd done this podcast slightly afterwards, but things will be happening. So keep your ears peeled, and maybe even by the time we put out this podcast, you'll already have some updates on what's happened. I know
But
that the Ukrainian troops are really looking for some type of ceasefire. I think people are really getting driven
Mhm.
down, beaten
Yep,
down.
agreed.
Yeah.
And now, still in the same area, Trump is in Saudi. And that's been a big meeting with lots of US business people together with Trump and lots of deals, including the Qataris um, giving Trump a 747, a palace in the sky that supposedly he will give to his presidential library, once he leaves
Give to the
office.
presidential library? How would that even work?
That's the line. Pretty incredible, $400 million or something. And his press secretary was asked, is this sort of this seems like corruption, and she denied that completely, and how Trump has given up so much money to become president, and he was so much more successful and rich before he
Oh,
became president. So very
what a poor
interesting
little
that
guy.
response.
But still ask him the price of eggs and he won't know.
So really, really interesting. And one of the interesting things in that meeting that Trump had a 30-minute meeting with the Syrian president,
Hmm.
the person who used to be a terrorist, and the US used to have all these um, contracts on his life, etc. Pretty incredible. And the US has lifted all sanctions on Syria, so things are moving quickly in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, when we look back to when we did our Syrian episode a long while ago, we were waiting to see what happened with the new government, but it's been fairly peaceful since then.
Hmm.
I mean, as relative as peace can be, I suppose, in Syria, but it's been fairly peaceful. So we should definitely do another episode and really look into that and see how it's
We
going.
should.
Um,
And the
so
other
look out for that.
interesting aside I heard was that Trump is getting a bit bored with Netanyahu because now he has new friends in the Middle East, including the Syrian guy and the
Oh
Saudi
God.
um, um, Saudis and the Qataris. So fascinating, right? This
Many,
whole
many, many, many.
change and how quickly it
Mm.
moves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think this is also interesting though in terms of Trump's popularity. I know a lot of his incredibly vocal supporters have been getting on him about this, about accepting a palace in the sky, as you so admiringly called it, about accepting that from from the Qataris. Yeah, it was,
Qataris.
yeah, yeah. So, his approval ratings are just like ever going down. Every day it feels like they drop another few. So that's interesting to see. That yeah, he's making allies, he's making mates, he's making friends who are going to give him fun, shiny things. But how long can the shiny thing sustain him? It's a real question. And Netanyahu isn't a shiny thing anymore. No bang for the
Yeah,
buck. So he's going to move
it's
on.
true. It's true.
But yeah, enough about Trump, I think. Do we want to
And
let's
another shiny thing
oh,
was, the latest tariff thing. So with China and how fundamentally the US seems to have backed down somewhat to reduce tariffs to 35% for
mm,
China. So as listeners would know, we've talked about China's been planning this sort of negotiation for many years with the US. And so clearly the US has blinked before China. And so, very interesting. The stock market is recovered fully and is now going up as a result of this because people are very concerned about US-China relations, etc. So, Trump supporters will be happy about the stock market going up. China will be happy that tariffs are far less than they anticipated them being. And so it's really a sort of a peaceful tariff scenario at this point.
mhm. Can we pause? Yeah, I mean, I guess it's as peaceful as it can be. Yeah, look, I think China's kind of accepting the situation. Sorry about that. Can we pause again? I don't know how to turn it. Yeah, so I guess they are relatively peaceful, you could say. Yeah, I don't know. Look, the tariffs are the tariffs. I don't really have much to say on that. It's just more Trumpian maneuvering,
Anyway,
and
I call it tariff détente at the moment, apart from the
mm,
latest one, which was for all international movies. There'd be a tariff on those. That's the latest sort of thought
yeah,
bubble
no,
around that
ridiculous.
concern the UK and Australia and other places where lots of movies are
Mm.
made,
And that's not
etc.
even just like affecting, international, like the movie industry. It's just affecting the American movie industry because they film so much of their movies in other countries. So it's just like really directly affecting them.
It's
So
true.
again, just another absolutely inane thing to do. But
It's true.
let's move
Fascinating.
on to
It
a
never stops.
country. Wait, sorry, what were you
Yep,
gonna say?
it never stops. Shall we move on to Australia?
Let's move on to a more peaceful, realistic country, which actually has a effective government and has, a reason for why they elect certain people to certain cabinet positions rather than just
So,
chucking anyone in
what
who wants to give it a go.
what what did you think of the new Labor ministry, the Albanese ministry?
Well, obviously, it's incredibly controversial, right? Like just chucking Ed Husic and Mark Dreyfus out of the cabinet entirely when, I mean, no one's really said that they've done a bad job. They've done a fairly good job. And I think it's interesting what this says about Labour as a party, right? That when it comes down to it, it comes down to how the factions work and
Hmm.
the bureaucracy within the party. And since there are so many new MPs, so many people vying for leadership, so many people who have a lot of potential and probably can do a lot of good being in government, that doesn't necessarily mean you should be chucking out people who have great merit and have great experience in the area, but I think that it's just a result of factions, right? I was
Hmm.
reading that the far right, not the far right, the right Victorian faction of the
Yes.
Labour Party has been, I think Richard Marles has been really defending the faction in order to
Yeah.
retain some power in the cabinet. And so that means that right, factions in other states have lost positions in the cabinet. So that's how it works. So they have to negotiate, swap people out, see how it goes. Obviously, Mark Dreyfus was not protected as part of the Victorian right faction, but I guess we'll see how that goes. And I know that that's been a big disappointment because he was the only Jewish minister, and now there's no Jewish representation in the Labour government, which, I mean, not that they were perceived by society as representing the Jewish population, but now they're obviously not.
Was
Absolutely
Ed
not.
Husic the only Muslim cabinet member? Cabinet
They
member. They have
no.
another MP, right?
Yeah, they have. I think they've promoted another person.
A woman.
Another. I
Yeah.
think it's a woman. Yeah,
Yes.
who's Muslim into the
Yes,
cabinet. So.
Freddie, I think it is brutal, but I think both those people rose to their positions of power because of the factions. So this is
Mm,
politics for you. You live and die by the factions. And what I read was Dreyfus is getting older. He's ready for retirement and such. I feel a bit bad for Ed Husic because I think he was a good performing minister
mm,
in the science portfolio, and I
yeah, I
think a lot of
agree.
the Muslim fraternity is sort of pretty pissed off about it. And in fact, in the Sydney seats and Melbourne seats, Muslim independents ran and actually achieved 30% of the vote or something. One was a dentist and one was a doctor, and they
Okay.
did really well. So Labor has to be somewhat careful about this longer term, right? To be seen to be
Definitely.
not impacting certain groups in our society through their
Hmm.
representation.
Yeah, for sure. No, I completely agree. And I know that a lot of people have been arguing that Albo could have stepped in and saved either of them if he wanted to. And is it a self-preservation tactic? Does he not see their merit? What's the real reason behind him
I
not
think
stepping in this situation?
he's a, he's a real advocate of the consensus and the
Mm,
and letting his team decide and letting the process run out. I think it's very smart of him. Why does he want to get
that's true.
involved in adjusting the factions? That is complicated to do that. Clearly, Tanya Plibersek now has social services, seems to be pleased about it, whether that's just a front or not. I don't know, but clearly the whole talk of her not being one of Albo's favourites has been sort of managed reasonably well, but she clearly is not in the centre of what he's trying to do.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this develops, and it's also interesting to see. Yeah, there are women in the cabinet, of course. A good representation of women, but there's a
More women than men, 57%
but
women, right?
but in the Labour Party elected MPs, there is more women than men, but there's not more
Right.
women than men in the cabinet. So I just think that's another good reminder to you particularly, because you often say, "Hey, look, there's just as many women in my company as there are men," but that doesn't necessarily mean that those women are in the positions of power or in the positions that men respect as powerful, like the
But
treasury, like finance
but Freddie,
minister.
the
Like,
caucus, there's more women in the caucus than men. So
oh no,
yes,
I'm
not the
aware.
cabinet, the subset. So that's a
Yeah,
good thing. That's never happened.
that's true. I know, but it never breaches the very upper level, the upper echelon. Can you say? Is that the right term? Um, it always seems to remain in a larger group of people where women have the
Uh,
majority.
So speaking of women, so we have our first female leader of the Liberal Party,
Oh
Susan Ley.
God. Yeah, what are your thoughts on Susan Ley?
Oh, look, I think thank goodness the Liberal Party chose her rather than
Mm,
Angus Taylor,
yeah,
who
of
had three
course.
years and didn't develop any policy. And Jacinta Price was running as his deputy. And then once Susan Ley got the Guernsey, she said she wasn't going to run as a deputy. And the
Deputy.
guy who's
What are you saying,
deputy,
deputy?
deputy,
What is
and
that? Why are
and
you still
so
saying it? Deputy.
deputy, and so she didn't run as the overall deputy. Um, and so now the guy who was running the nuclear policy is the new deputy of the Liberal Party. But look, I think Susan Lay is a good choice. She's a good performer. She's a pilot. She's from the rural part of the country, quite strategic. The big question for me of the Liberal Party, are they really serious about having a woman, or do they just want her to come in after their defeat and help clean up the mess and then replace her with a man at some point? And I think the test of that will be whether they implement quotas for women in their party. That is the real test of the Liberal Party.
I completely agree, and I actually think you got half of that point of what I was telling you the other day, how she is not merely just the new Liberal leader, she is a sacrificial lamb sent to be massacred over the next few years as the Liberal Party tries to sort itself out again, and then once it's back to its normal standard, they will elect a man again. Because this is I was explaining this to you, but I'm happy to explain it on the podcast as well. In case you guys don't know, there's a common phenomenon called the glass cliff, which is a situation where women are not, you know, are not, oh my gosh, what's that word when you get like given a better job? I'm
Promotion.
blanking. A promotion. Yeah, you're not promoted to a better position until there's a time of crisis. And then in a time of crisis, a woman will be promoted in order to take all the blame and be responsible for all the faults. And people will easily believe that the woman is responsible for all the faults, and then they will take her out of politics again. And that happens a lot. It happens in businesses. It happens in, now the Australian Liberal Party. So we'll see what happens with that. And if, yeah, as you said, if they're serious about it, if they actually put a quota in, she's one of very few, and she may be a woman, but she doesn't really stand for women, because if you've seen any of her voting history, she has consistently voted against improving women's health, and improving women's like labor rights and childcare, etc., etc. So obviously typical of the Liberal Party, but she's voted against what women often stand for. So who is she really?
First test will be whether they stay with the Nationals or whether they split with the
Mm.
Nationals. Yeah, she's got a very interesting time going forward over coming months. But good for her.
I
I mean, it's
mean,
great. First female leader of the Liberal Party.
yeah,
Got to
in
celebrate
many,
that.
many years. So it's definitely a statement. She'll be remembered. We're not sure what for yet, but she'll definitely be remembered. And then there's the Nationals Party, right? So Little Proud is again in charge. I think that's a big, um, a big shocker. Well, not a shocker, but it's a big cog in the wheels. Sorry, I'm
Well, no,
forgetting
it's
all
not a
my fun.
surprise. Matt
No, it's not
Canavan,
a surprise. I'm just forgetting all my fun little
fine.
phrases today, so I'm not really getting out what I'm trying to say properly. It's a big it's a big spanner in the works in the way that the Nationals now have far more like MPs. They didn't lose
Oh,
really
power.
any
Yes,
MPs.
relative to the Liberal Party. Yes.
In the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party obviously only has like 36, like 40 like MPs at this point in time. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that they have far less power than they've ever had, as opposed to the Liberal Party. And what does that mean for the coalition? And what does that mean for how they take a policy stance from now on? Are the
It's
Nationals going
true.
to take the forefront of that policy stance? And is little
But don't
Proud
worry,
going to be?
Jacinta Price is now a
Um,
Liberal, so everything will be okay.
all right, fabulous. Who do they even have left if they don't have Jacinta Price, I suppose? But
No.
yeah, good to know. Good to know. Obviously,
Anyway,
that
let's
failed.
watch the space. Let's watch the space. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again,
Hmm.
please subscribe on YouTube or Spotify and like us and tell your friends, and love to get your questions. Thanks, Freddie.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.